3 years ago, Margaret Chen disappeared after purchasing an abandoned mansion for just $1 in the small town of Millbrook, Pennsylvania. The 34-year-old art teacher had dreamed of restoring the Victorian house that had stood empty for over 40 years, but she vanished without a trace just 2 weeks after signing the deed. Her disappearance plunged her elderly parents into devastating grief and left the tight-knit community of 3,000 residents in complete bewilderment. The local police considered various possibilities, from voluntary disappearance to foul play, but couldn't solve the case, causing outrage among Margaret's family, who never lost hope. They continue fighting for the truth to emerge. Before we continue, subscribe and hit the notification bell. Here we reopen archived cases with respect and evidence. Margaret Chen had always been drawn to forgotten places. As an elementary school art teacher in nearby Lancaster, she spent her weekends exploring antique shops and abandoned buildings, photographing their decay with an artist's eye. When she heard about the Blackwood estate, a sprawling Victorian mansion sitting empty since 1983, she immediately contacted the city council about purchasing it. The house, built in 1889 by railroad baron Theodore Blackwood, had been tied up in legal disputes for decades after the last heir died intestate. The mansion's history was as complex as its Gothic architecture. Theodore Blackwood had built it for his young bride, Elena, but tragedy struck when she died in childbirth just 2 years later. Blackwood never remarried, becoming increasingly reclusive until his death in 1923. The house passed through various hands over the decades, but no family ever stayed long. Some claimed the house was cursed, others simply found it too expensive to maintain. By 2022, the city was desperate to get the property back on the tax rolls. The building had become a liability. Vandals broke windows, copper thieves stripped the pipes, and teenagers dared each other to spend nights in its empty rooms. The city council voted unanimously to sell it for the symbolic price of $1 to anyone willing to restore it within 5 years and pay the accumulated back taxes of $47,000. Margaret saw opportunity where others saw burden. She had inherited a modest sum from her grandmother and had been saving for years to buy her own home. The Blackwood estate, despite its reputation, represented everything she'd dreamed of: high ceilings, original hardwood floors, intricate crown molding, and enough space to create the art studio she'd always wanted. Her parents thought she was making a terrible mistake, but Margaret was determined. On September 15th, 2022, Margaret signed the deed in the cramped City Hall office. City Clerk Dorothy Williams remembered her excitement. She was practically glowing. She kept talking about the house's potential, how she could feel its history calling to her. She said she wasn't afraid of hard work or old stories. Margaret paid the dollar bill with ceremony, folding it carefully and handing it to Williams with a bright smile. That afternoon, Margaret drove to the mansion with her digital camera and notebook, documenting every room for her restoration plans. Neighbors later reported seeing her car parked outside until well after sunset. Mrs. Eleanor Fitzpatrick, who lived across the street, watched from her kitchen window as Margaret moved through the house with a flashlight, the beam dancing from window to window like a ghost itself. The next morning, Margaret returned with cleaning supplies, a crowbar, and renewed determination. She spent the weekend clearing debris from the main floor, posting excited updates on her social media accounts. "Day 2 in my new home," she wrote, alongside photos of sunlight streaming through dust-covered windows. "Every corner holds a secret waiting to be discovered." The post received dozens of encouraging comments from friends and fellow teachers. But by Monday, September 26th, Margaret's enthusiasm would turn to something much darker, and the house that had promised to fulfill her dreams would become the center of a mystery that would haunt Millbrook for years to come. Margaret Chen's final weekend at the Blackwood estate began like any other. She arrived early Saturday morning, September 24th, with her car loaded with restoration supplies she'd ordered online. drop cloths, paintbrushes, wood stain samples, and a new set of power tools she'd never used before. Her friend and teaching colleague Sarah Martinez had offered to help, but Margaret insisted she wanted to work alone for the first few weeks. "I need to get a feel for the place," Margaret had explained during their Friday lunch at the school cafeteria. "Every old house has its own personality, and I want to understand this one before I start changing things." Sarah later told investigators that Margaret seemed excited, but also strangely intense about the project. More so than usual for someone who collected vintage postcards and taught finger painting to 7-year-olds. The Victorian mansion stood 3 stories tall, with a distinctive tower room on the northwest corner. Its original burgundy paint had faded to rust, and several shutters hung at odd angles like broken wings. The wraparound porch sagged in places, but the house's bones remained solid. Margaret had spent hours studying architectural books about the period, learning about balloon frame construction and traditional restoration techniques. That Saturday, she focused on the main parlour, a grand room with a marble fireplace and bay windows facing the street. Neighbours reported seeing her moving furniture around, the sounds of dragging and scraping echoing from the house throughout the afternoon. Mrs. Fitzpatrick noticed Margaret's silhouette passing by the windows regularly until about 6 p.m. when the activity seemed to stop. At 7:30 p.m. Margaret called her parents from inside the house. Her mother, Linda Chen, later described the conversation as normal, but noted that Margaret seemed tired. She said she'd been working hard and was making good progress. She mentioned finding some interesting things in the walls. Old newspapers and photographs that previous owners had left behind. She sounded happy but exhausted. Sunday morning brought rain, but Margaret's Honda Civic was back in the driveway by 9 a.m. Mrs. Fitzpatrick saw her carrying a large bag into the house, though she couldn't make out what was inside. The elderly neighbour later regretted not going over to introduce herself properly. "I kept thinking I'd bring her some cookies once she got settled. I never imagined." The last confirmed sighting of Margaret was at 3:47 p.m. on Sunday, September 25th. Delivery driver Tom Rodriguez was dropping off a package at a house 2 blocks away when he noticed a woman matching Margaret's description standing in the tower room window. She appeared to be looking directly down at the street, but when he waved, she didn't respond. "She just stood there, real still," Rodriguez told police. "Something about it gave me the creeps." Margaret's phone records show she sent a text message to her sister at 5:15 p.m. Making incredible progress. "This house is full of surprises. Talk tomorrow." It was the last communication anyone would receive from her. When Margaret failed to show up for work Monday morning, the principal called her parents, who immediately drove to Millbrook. They found her car still parked outside the mansion, keys in the ignition, her purse on the passenger seat with wallet and phone intact. The front door was locked, but Margaret had given her parents a spare key the weekend before. Inside, they discovered her tools laid out neatly in the parlour, as if she'd simply stepped away for a moment. A half-eaten sandwich sat on the mantelpiece, and her notebook lay open to a page titled "Second Floor Plans." But Margaret was nowhere to be found. The house felt empty in a way that went beyond simple absence. It felt abandoned again, as if it had swallowed whatever life she'd brought to it. Her parents called out her name, their voices echoing through rooms that had been silent for too long. The only response was the settling of old wood and the whisper of wind through gaps in the windows. When Millbrook Police Chief Robert Hayes arrived at the Blackwood estate on September 26, 2022, he expected to find a missing person case with a logical explanation. Margaret Chen seemed like a responsible adult who might have simply decided to take a spontaneous trip or had an accident somewhere on the property. But as he walked through the Victorian mansion with Margaret's frantic parents, an unsettling detail immediately caught his attention. On the second floor, in what had once been the master bedroom, a tall casement window stood wide open. The window faced the mansion's overgrown backyard, where ancient oak trees created deep shadows, even in daylight. Mrs. Chen was certain the window had been closed when Margaret showed them around the house the previous weekend. More disturbing was the fact that the window was difficult to open. The original brass hardware was corroded, and it took considerable force to move the heavy frame. Margaret was only 5'3" and maybe 110 pounds, her father David Chen told Chief Hayes. I had to help her open that same window when we were here last Sunday. She couldn't manage it on her own. The window's position, 12 feet above the ground with no porch or trellis beneath it, made it an unlikely escape route. Yet something had compelled someone to force it open during the night. Before we continue, subscribe and hit the notification bell. Here we reopen archived cases with respect and evidence. The investigation began in earnest that afternoon. Chief Hayes, working with state police investigators, processed the scene methodically. Margaret's fingerprints were found throughout the house, concentrated mainly on the first floor where she'd been working. Her tools were arranged with almost obsessive precision in the main parlor. Brushes cleaned and lined up by size, drop cloths folded perfectly, even her measuring tape wound tight and placed exactly parallel to the fireplace. Detective Lisa Morrison, assigned to the case from the state police, noted the contrast between the organized workspace downstairs and the chaos they discovered in the second-floor bedroom. Dust patterns on the hardwood floor suggested furniture had been moved recently, dragged across the room in seemingly random directions. A heavy dresser sat at an odd angle, as if someone had pushed it hastily toward the open window before abandoning the effort. The most puzzling evidence came from Margaret's notebook, found open to a page dated September 25th, the day she disappeared. Her handwriting, usually neat and organized, became increasingly erratic as the entries progressed. Early notes documented normal restoration observations. Parlor ceiling shows water damage from roof leak, likely 1990s. Check attic access. But the later entries took a darker turn. Footsteps overhead when no one upstairs. Doors closing on their own. Getting stronger after sunset. Margaret's final entry, written in shaky handwriting at the bottom of the page, simply read, "They want me to stay. The window won't close anymore." Neighbors began coming forward with their own unsettling observations. Mrs. Fitzpatrick admitted she'd been watching the house more closely than she'd initially told police. "That last night, Sunday, I saw lights moving around upstairs after midnight. Not electric lights, more like candles or flashlights. And I could swear I heard voices, but Margaret's car was the only one there." Tom Martinez, who lived 3 houses down, reported hearing what sounded like furniture being dragged across floors around 2 a.m. "It went on for maybe 20 minutes, then just stopped. I figured she was working late, trying to get things organized. Old houses carry sound funny, especially at night." The open window became a focal point for both investigators and increasingly nervous residents. Detective Morrison had the window examined by a locksmith who confirmed it required significant force to open due to warped wood and corroded hardware. "Someone really wanted this window open," he told investigators. "Or maybe something wanted out." Chief Hayes tried to maintain a rational approach to the investigation, but even he couldn't explain why Margaret would have struggled to open a difficult window in the middle of the night, especially one that led to nothing but a dangerous drop into overgrown bushes. Security cameras from a gas station 3 blocks away showed Margaret's car never left the driveway after Sunday afternoon, ruling out the possibility that she'd driven anywhere. As news of Margaret's disappearance spread through Millbrook, old stories about the Blackwood estate began surfacing again. Elderly residents remembered previous families who'd moved out suddenly, always citing strange occurrences they wouldn't elaborate on. The house had been empty since 1983, when the Hendricks family fled in the middle of the night, leaving most of their belongings behind. Now, te convido a deixar nos comentários de onde você está nos assistindo e o horário exato em que escuta esta história. Nos interessa saber até quais lugares e em quais momentos do dia ou da noite chegam estes relatos documentados. The investigation was just beginning, but already the case felt different from typical missing person reports. The open window seemed less like evidence and more like a message, a signal that something fundamental had changed in the Blackwood estate, and Margaret Chen had been the first to discover what that meant. Detective Lisa Morrison had investigated missing person cases for 12 years, but the Margaret Chen disappearance felt different from the start. Standard protocol involved examining the victim's personal life for signs of depression, financial troubles, or relationship issues that might explain a voluntary disappearance. But Margaret's life painted the picture of someone genuinely excited about her future, not someone planning to vanish. Her bank records showed careful financial planning for the house restoration. She'd been saving money systematically for 2 years, researching contractors, and even taking online courses in historical preservation. Her classroom had been decorated with architectural sketches and photos of Victorian houses she admired. Fellow teachers described her as methodical and reliable, someone who planned everything down to the smallest detail. The breakthrough came when investigators decided to examine the house more thoroughly. While processing Margaret's workspace in the main parlor, Detective Morrison noticed something odd about the fireplace. The marble hearth had been moved slightly, revealing scratches on the floor beneath it. Margaret's notebook contained measurements of the room that didn't match the current furniture arrangement, suggesting she'd been systematically moving heavy pieces. Behind the displaced hearth, investigators discovered a cavity in the wall that had been concealed for decades. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, they found a collection of items that hadn't seen daylight since the 1920s. Letters, photographs, and a leather-bound journal belonging to Theodore Blackwood, the mansion's original owner. The discovery explained Margaret's cryptic notebook entries about finding interesting things in the walls. Blackwood's journal revealed the dark history Margaret had apparently uncovered. The railroad baron hadn't been the grieving widower that local history portrayed. His wife Elena hadn't died in childbirth. She'd disappeared under mysterious circumstances in 1891, just 2 years after the house was completed. Blackwood had told neighbors she'd died, even held a funeral with an empty casket. But his private writings told a different story. "E discovered the room," one journal entry read. "She knows what I keep there. Tonight she threatened to tell the authorities. I cannot allow this." Later, entries became increasingly paranoid and disjointed. "She moves through the house at night. The servants hear her footsteps. They're beginning to ask questions. Must find another solution." The journal's final entries, dated just weeks before Blackwood's own death in 1923, suggested he'd been tormented by guilt and possibly hallucinations. "She never left. The window stays open no matter how many times I seal it. She's waiting for someone to understand, to tell her story. God forgive me for what I've done." Detective Morrison felt a chill reading those words, remembering the open window in the master bedroom where Margaret had disappeared. The journal provided disturbing context for Margaret's own final notebook entries about doors closing and footsteps overhead. Had she discovered the same historical secrets that had driven Theodore Blackwood to madness? The investigation expanded to include ground-penetrating radar scanning of the mansion's basement and grounds. If Elena Blackwood had truly been murdered in 1891, her remains might still be on the property. The radar revealed several anomalies beneath the basement floor, areas where the ground had been disturbed and filled in sometime in the distant past. While waiting for excavation permits, Detective Morrison interviewed Margaret's family again, focusing on her activities during those final weeks. Margaret's sister, Amy, revealed that Margaret had been having strange dreams since purchasing the house. "She called me twice about nightmares, where she was trapped in the house, trying to open windows that wouldn't budge. She said it felt more like memories than dreams." Margaret had also been researching the house's history obsessively, spending hours at the local historical society and requesting records from the county clerk's office. Librarian Helen Warren remembered Margaret's particular interest in newspaper archives from the 1890s. She was looking for any mention of Elena Blackwood's death. When I told her I couldn't find an obituary or death certificate, she got very excited. She said that proved something wasn't right about the official story. No. The Historical Society's files contained another crucial piece of evidence: architectural drawings of the original house that showed a small room behind the master bedroom's north wall. The room wasn't included in any renovations or floor plans from later decades, suggesting it had been sealed up permanently sometime after Elena's disappearance. Margaret's notebook contained measurements and sketches that matched these original blueprints exactly. Her final weekend at the house, she hadn't just been cleaning, she'd been searching for that hidden room. Her last text message to her sister about incredible progress and the house being full of surprises took on new meaning. Margaret had discovered Elena Blackwood's secret and possibly her fate, but understanding what Margaret had found didn't explain where she had gone. The open window remained the investigation's most puzzling element. If Margaret had uncovered evidence of a century-old murder, why hadn't she called police? Why had she spent her final night apparently trying to escape through a second-story window instead of simply walking out the front door? The answers lay deeper in the mansion's dark history, in secrets that connected Elena Blackwood's disappearance in 1891 to Margaret Chen's vanishing in 2022. Both women had been drawn to the same house, discovered the same terrible truth, and faced the same impossible choice: tell the world what they'd learned, or become part of the mansion's collection of buried secrets. As the investigation into Margaret Chen's disappearance entered its second week, Detective Lisa Morrison began uncovering a disturbing pattern that stretched back over 130 years. The Blackwood estate hadn't just been the site of one mysterious vanishing, it had been claiming victims regularly, always women, always under circumstances that defied logical explanation. The County Records Office, prompted by Morrison's requests, began digitizing old files related to the property. What emerged was a timeline of tragedy that local historians had either overlooked or deliberately ignored. Between 1891 and 2022, 8 women had disappeared from or near the Blackwood estate. The cases had been investigated by different police departments across different decades, preventing anyone from recognizing the pattern until now. Elena Blackwood in 1891 was just the beginning. In 1923, the same year Theodore Blackwood died, a young housemaid named Catherine Mills vanished while cleaning the estate for its sale. The new owners, the Weatherby family, reported finding her personal belongings in the second-floor bedroom, but Catherine herself was never seen again. Local newspapers from the time attributed her disappearance to wanderlust and suggested she'd run away to the city. The Hendricks family, who owned the house from 1978 to 1983, had tried to keep their own tragedy quiet. Their teenage daughter, Rebecca, disappeared during a family dinner in November 1982. She'd gone upstairs to her bedroom and simply vanished. The family left town within 6 months, telling neighbors they couldn't bear to stay in the house where their daughter had disappeared. Detective Morrison located Robert Hendricks, now 73, and living in Florida. His phone interview revealed details that had never been included in the original police report. Rebecca had been acting strange for weeks before she disappeared, he told Morrison. She kept talking about a woman who visited her room at night, someone who looked sad and needed help. We thought it was just teenage imagination. The night Rebecca vanished, the family heard furniture moving upstairs during dinner. When they investigated, they found her bedroom window wide open and Rebecca gone. The window was 12 feet off the ground, just like when your girl disappeared, Hendricks said. Rebecca was terrified of heights. She would never have climbed out that window voluntarily. If this case has already gripped you, leave a like. It helps Margaret Chen's story reach more people. Each disappearance followed the same inexplicable pattern. Women drawn to the house's history, increasingly obsessed with its secrets, then vanishing through impossibly opened second-floor windows. The victims ranged in age from 16 to 34. came from different social backgrounds and had no connection to each other except their association with the Blackwood estate. Morrison's investigation revealed that Margaret had unknowingly followed the same path as her predecessors. The Historical Society's files showed that Rebecca Hendricks had also been researching Elena Blackwood's story in the months before her disappearance. Catherine Mills had been found reading old letters in the house, letters that were later discovered missing from Theodore Blackwood's personal papers. The discovery of Blackwood's hidden journal provided new insight into what might be happening. His final entries described increasing paranoia about Elena's presence in the house. He wrote about finding windows open that he'd sealed shut, hearing footsteps in empty rooms, and most disturbingly, about other women who'd entered the house and understood Elena's message. "They come seeking the truth," one entry read. "But the truth demands a price. Elena shows them what happened to her, and they must choose, remain silent and live with the knowledge, or join her in bearing witness. Most cannot bear the burden of silence." Detective Morrison began to theorize that Margaret had discovered not just Elena's story, but evidence of the other disappearances as well. Her notebook contained sketches of areas throughout the house where she'd apparently found hidden objects. Behind loose floorboards in the tower room, investigators discovered items belonging to previous victims. Rebecca Hendricks' high school class ring, Catherine Mills's prayer book, and jewelry that matched descriptions from other missing person reports. The evidence suggested that Margaret had pieced together the pattern herself during those final weeks. Her sister Amy revealed that Margaret had called her on September 20th, 5 days before disappearing, asking strange questions about family history and whether Amy believed in ghosts. She said she'd found something terrible in the house, something that explained why so many women had disappeared, but she wouldn't tell me what it was over the phone. Margaret's internet search history, recovered from her laptop, showed extensive research into the other missing women. She'd been trying to contact families of previous victims, leaving voicemails for the Hendricks family, and requesting old police files through Freedom of Information requests. Her browser history also revealed searches for historical murder evidence, cold case investigations, and supernatural encounters in old houses. And the most chilling discovery came from Margaret's digital camera, found in her car. The final photos, taken on September 25th, the day she disappeared, showed the second-floor bedroom in various states of disruption. Furniture had been moved to reveal sections of the wall and floor, as if Margaret had been searching desperately for something. The last photo, time-stamped at 5:47 p.m., showed the bedroom window standing wide open with something white, possibly fabric, hanging from the frame. But Margaret wasn't in any of the photos. The camera appeared to have been operating on its own, documenting events that Margaret may not have been conscious of. The images suggested a frantic struggle, as if someone, or something, had been trying to prevent Margaret from leaving the room through conventional means. The investigation had revealed a century-spanning pattern of disappearances, but it still couldn't explain the mechanism behind them. How did women keep vanishing from a locked house? Why were the windows always found open? And most importantly, where had Margaret Chen gone on that September night when the autumn wind carried her final secrets into the darkness? 3 weeks into the investigation, the excavation team finally received permits to explore the anomalies detected by ground-penetrating radar beneath the Blackwood Estate's basement. Detective Morrison coordinated with the county coroner's office and forensic anthropologists from Penn State University, expecting to uncover evidence of Eleanor Blackwood's murder from 1891. What they found instead shattered every assumption about the case. The basement excavation revealed a complex network of tunnels and chambers that predated the mansion's construction. The underground passages connected to natural limestone caves that extended far beyond the property boundaries, creating a labyrinthine system beneath downtown Millbrook. Historical geological surveys confirmed that the town sat atop an extensive cave network, something early settlers had known but later generations had forgotten. Dr. Sarah Chen, the forensic anthropologist leading the excavation, discovered that the tunnels had been deliberately modified and expanded. Tool marks on the cave walls indicated systematic excavation work spanning decades, possibly longer. More disturbing were the living spaces carved into several chambers, rough furniture, oil lamp holders carved into the rock, and evidence that people had inhabited these underground areas for extended periods. Someone created an entire underground community down here, Dr. Chen reported to Detective Morrison. The modifications showed different periods of construction, suggesting continuous habitation across multiple generations. This wasn't just a hiding place, it was a permanent residence for people who didn't want to be found. The discovery explained the impossible disappearances that had plagued the mansion for over a century. The second-floor bedroom, where Margaret and others had vanished, sat directly above the most elaborate underground chamber. A vertical shaft, concealed within the house's original construction, connected the bedroom to the caves below. The shaft had been designed to look like a decorative architectural feature, a narrow tower column that ran from basement to roof. Theodore Blackwood's journal took on new meaning in light of this discovery. His references to Elena never leaving and moving through the house at night weren't descriptions of supernatural activity. They were accounts of a woman who had discovered the underground passages and been forced to live in them. Blackwood hadn't murdered his wife. He'd imprisoned her in the caves beneath their home. Elena's remains, when finally located in the deepest chamber, told a story of survival against impossible odds. She had lived underground for at least 2 years after her supposed death, evidenced by personal items dated to 1893. Her final resting place included a collection of journals written on scraps of paper and cloth, documenting her captivity and her discovery of others who had shared her fate. Elena's makeshift writings revealed that the underground community had existed long before the mansion was built. Indigenous peoples had used the caves seasonally, but more recently, the tunnels had become refuge for people fleeing various circumstances. Runaway slaves using the Underground Railroad, women escaping abusive marriages, and others who needed to disappear from the world above. Elena had discovered this hidden community shortly after her marriage to Theodore, but when she tried to help other women find refuge there, her husband had trapped her underground to prevent her from exposing his business connections to illegal activities. Theodore Blackwood hadn't been just a railroad baron, he'd been involved in human trafficking, using the underground network to transport people while maintaining his respectable public image. The caves had continued to shelter desperate people long after Elena's death. Catherine Mills, the housemaid who disappeared in 1923, had left her own journal describing her decision to join the underground community rather than return to an abusive employer. Rebecca Hendricks had found refuge there in 1982, fleeing family problems that were worse than her parents had admitted to police. Detective Morrison's investigation revealed that Margaret Chen had discovered not just the historical truth, but evidence that people were still living in the caves. Her final notebook entries made sense now. The footsteps overhead had been underground community members moving through passages that connected to various buildings in town. The doors closing on their own had been access points to the tunnel system, activated by people moving through hidden passages. Margaret's last photographs showed her preparing to enter the underground network voluntarily. The white fabric hanging from the bedroom window hadn't been evidence of escape. It had been a signal to underground community members that someone new wanted to join them. The opened window was a traditional sign that the bedroom's occupant was ready to leave the surface world behind. Phone records revealed that Margaret had been in contact with someone in the days before her disappearance, receiving calls from a number that traced to a disconnected landline that had been secretly rerouted to the underground community's communication system. Someone had been guiding her, preparing her for the transition from the surface world to life in the caves. The investigation had solved the mystery of Margaret Chen's disappearance, but it created new questions about how many people were living beneath Millbrook, how they survived, and whether they were there voluntarily. The underground community represented a shadow society that had operated for over 150 years, helping people disappear when disappearing was their only option for survival. But Margaret Chen wasn't just another runaway or someone fleeing desperate circumstances. She was a respected teacher with a stable life who had stumbled upon historical secrets and made a choice that would change everything about how the world understood the Blackwood estate and the town built above its hidden foundation. The discovery of the underground community beneath Millbrook forced Detective Morrison to completely reconsider the nature of her investigation. This wasn't a missing person case anymore. It was an exploration of a parallel society that had existed hidden beneath the town for over 150 years. Margaret Chen hadn't been kidnapped or murdered. She had voluntarily joined a community of people who had chosen to live outside conventional society. The evidence from the caves painted a picture of remarkable organization and sustainability. The underground community had developed its own systems for food production, water collection, and waste management. Hydroponic gardens flourished in chambers with carefully managed artificial lighting powered by generators connected to the town's electrical grid through unauthorized taps. The community had been essentially stealing utilities for decades without detection. Dr. Sarah Chen's archaeological team documented living spaces for approximately 30 people, though it was unclear how many were currently occupied. The accommodations ranged from basic sleeping alcoves to elaborate multi-room apartments carved into the limestone. Some areas showed continuous habitation spanning decades, with furniture and personal belongings accumulated over generations. The most sophisticated area was a central chamber that served as a community meeting space and library. Here, investigators found extensive records of everyone who had joined the underground society, dating back to the 1850s. The records revealed that Margaret Chen had been corresponding with community leaders for weeks before her disappearance, learning about their history and the process for joining them permanently. Elena Blackwood's story emerged as the community's founding legend. After her forced imprisonment in the caves, she had discovered other refugees and helped organize them into a mutual support network. When she died in 1893, she had become a martyred figure whose sacrifice inspired others to maintain the community she had helped create. The tradition of women disappearing through the second-floor window had become a ritualized entrance ceremony. Detective Morrison gained access to Margaret's correspondence with the underground community through encrypted files found on her laptop. The communications revealed that Margaret hadn't stumbled upon the community by accident. She had been actively recruited. Community members had been monitoring her research into the mansion's history, recognizing her as someone who might be sympathetic to their cause. The surface world is becoming increasingly hostile to people who don't fit conventional patterns, one message to Margaret read. We offer an alternative, a place where people can live authentically without judgment or interference. But the decision to join us is irreversible. We cannot risk exposure by allowing people to move freely between our world and the surface. Margaret's responses showed her growing fascination with the community's philosophy and lifestyle. She had been struggling with depression and isolation since her divorce 2 years earlier, feeling disconnected from her surface life despite her professional success. The underground community offered her a sense of purpose and belonging that she couldn't find in conventional society. The community's recruitment process was careful and gradual. Potential members underwent months of evaluation and preparation before being invited to make the final transition. Margaret had been attending secret meetings in various cave chambers throughout September, learning about community rules and expectations. Her final decision came after she discovered that several of her surface world friends and colleagues were also secretly connected to the underground network. Sarah Martinez, Margaret's teaching colleague who had offered to help with the house restoration, was revealed to be a community liaison who maintained a surface identity while facilitating recruitment and communication. Margaret's disappearance had been carefully orchestrated, with Martinez ensuring that Margaret's absence from work would be discovered quickly enough to trigger an investigation that would uncover the community's existence. The underground society wanted to be discovered, but only on their terms. They had grown tired of hiding and were ready to negotiate with surface authorities for recognition and legal protection. Margaret's case was intended to serve as a catalyst for this negotiation, forcing local government to acknowledge the community's existence and rights. Detective Morrison found herself in an unprecedented situation. The people she had been investigating as missing persons were actually members of a functioning society that had deliberately chosen to live outside conventional legal structures. They weren't victims. They were autonomous individuals who had made informed decisions about their lives, even if those decisions seemed incomprehensible to surface dwellers. The legal questions were complex. Had the underground community been trespassing on private property for 150 years? Were they stealing utilities and evading taxes? Or were they indigenous peoples exercising ancestral rights to caves that predated European settlement? The community's records included Native American members whose families had traditional connections to the cave system. More importantly, did surface authorities have the right to force community members to return to a world they had deliberately rejected? Margaret Chen was legally an adult who had made an informed decision about her life. If she was safe and living voluntarily in the underground community, was her disappearance actually a crime at all? Detective Morrison realized that solving Margaret Chen's case would require redefining fundamental assumptions about missing persons, individual rights, and the boundaries between different societies sharing the same geographical space. The investigation had uncovered not just where Margaret had gone, but an entire world that challenged everything authorities thought they knew about their town and its people. 6 weeks after Margaret Chen's disappearance, Detective Morrison faced an ethical dilemma that had no precedent in police procedure manuals. Through intermediaries in the underground community, she had established contact with Margaret herself. The art teacher was alive, healthy, and adamant that she had made her choice freely, but confirming Margaret's safety only complicated the legal and moral questions surrounding the case. The underground community operated according to strict protocols about contact with surface authorities. Margaret was allowed to send a single message to her family, confirming her safety and explaining her decision in terms that wouldn't reveal specific details about the community's location or operations. The message, delivered through Sarah Martinez, devastated Margaret's parents, but provided closure they desperately needed. "I know this is impossible for you to understand," Margaret's letter read, "but I have found a place where I belong in ways I never experienced in the surface world. I am safe, valued, and contributing to something meaningful. Please don't try to find me or bring me back. This is my choice, and it's the first choice I've made in years that feels completely right." Chief Hayes found himself navigating unprecedented territory. The case had attracted attention from federal authorities interested in the underground community's complex legal status. Were they squatters who could be evicted, or did their long-term occupation give them some form of legal claim to the caves? The community's utility connections constituted theft, but prosecuting people who had been stealing electricity for decades seemed both impractical and ethically questionable. The Blackwood estate itself became the center of negotiations between surface authorities and underground community representatives. The community claimed historical rights to the caves beneath the property, arguing that Theodore Blackwood had built his mansion deliberately to exploit their existing settlement. They offered to purchase the surface property at fair market value, legitimizing their occupation while maintaining their privacy. Detective Morrison's investigation revealed that the underground community wasn't just a group of people hiding from society. They had developed sophisticated systems for contributing to the surface world while maintaining their separate existence. Community members worked as freelance writers, computer programmers, artists and consultants, generating income that supported their underground infrastructure and paid taxes under carefully managed identities. Several community members maintained partial surface lives, like Sarah Martinez, serving as bridges between the two worlds. These liaisons helped recruit new members while monitoring surface developments that might affect the community's security. The network was more extensive than authorities had initially realized, with connections in multiple states and ongoing communication with similar communities in other locations. Margaret's integration into underground life proceeded smoothly, according to reports from community liaisons. Her teaching background made her valuable for educating community children, and her artistic skills contributed to the elaborate murals and decorative elements that made the cave chambers feel like home rather than hiding places. She had found the sense of purpose and community that had been missing from her surface life. The media attention surrounding Margaret's case had unintended consequences for the underground community. While they had wanted their existence acknowledged, the publicity attracted unwanted interest from religious groups claiming the community represented cult activity and from government agencies concerned about potential security threats. The community found itself defending not just their right to exist, but their right to privacy and self-determination. Margaret's parents, Linda and David Chen, struggled to accept their daughter's choice, but eventually agreed to limited contact through community liaisons. They were allowed to send letters and receive updates about Margaret's well-being, but direct meetings were prohibited to protect community security. The compromise arrangement was painful, but preferable to complete uncertainty about Margaret's fate. The investigation's resolution challenged fundamental assumptions about individual rights and social obligations. Margaret Chen had committed no crime by choosing to disappear from her surface life. The underground community had operated illegally in some respects, but had also provided essential services for people who couldn't find help through conventional social systems. Forcing them to disband or emerge could harm vulnerable people who depended on their protection. Detective Morrison closed her official case file with a recommendation that no criminal charges be filed. Margaret Chen was not a missing person. She was someone who had chosen to relocate to a different community that happened to exist underground. The legal system would need to develop new frameworks for addressing such situations as society became increasingly complex and diverse. The Blackwood estate remained empty on the surface, its Victorian rooms gathering dust while life continued in the elaborate chambers beneath. The mansion had fulfilled its original purpose as Theodore Blackwood had unknowingly designed it as a gateway between worlds, allowing people to transition from surface existence to something deeper and more hidden. Margaret Chen's story had become a symbol of individual choice and the lengths people would go to find authentic community. Her disappearance wasn't a tragedy, it was a transformation that challenged everyone involved to reconsider their assumptions about what constituted a normal, acceptable life. 1 year after Margaret Chen's disappearance, the Blackwood estate had become an unlikely symbol of individual autonomy and the complexity of human choices. The Victorian mansion stood empty above ground, while serving as a recognized portal to the thriving community below. Local authorities had negotiated a unique arrangement that acknowledged the underground society's rights while establishing minimal oversight to ensure public safety. Detective Morrison, now promoted to sergeant, maintained her role as the primary liaison between surface law enforcement and the underground community, The relationship had evolved from investigation to cooperation, with both sides benefiting from the arrangement. The community provided valuable assistance with missing person cases involving people who might be seeking alternative living situations, while surface authorities helped protect the community from unwanted intrusion. The legal precedent established by Margaret's case had attracted attention from civil rights organizations and alternative community advocates nationwide. The Millbrook Protocols became a model for how authorities could interact with unconventional societies while respecting individual choice and community autonomy. Similar underground communities in other states began negotiating their own recognition agreements. Margaret Chen had become something of a celebrity within alternative living circles, though she rarely spoke publicly about her experience. Through community liaisons, she had agreed to limited interviews that helped other people understand the appeal of underground life. Her story inspired a documentary film and several academic papers about intentional communities and the right to disappear. "People assume I was running away from something," Margaret said in one recorded interview, "but I was actually running towards something I'd been searching for my whole life." The surface world demands that you fit into predetermined categories and roles. Here, we create our own definitions of meaningful existence. The underground community had grown since Margaret's arrival, with new members joining monthly through the established recruitment and evaluation process. The publicity surrounding Margaret's case had paradoxically both protected and endangered the community. While it brought official recognition, it also attracted people seeking easy escape from surface world problems without understanding the commitment required for underground life. Sarah Martinez had transitioned to full-time liaison work, helping manage the complex relationships between the two worlds. Her teaching position had been restructured to allow her to work part-time above ground, while spending most of her time facilitating community operations below. The arrangement satisfied education officials while providing the community with essential surface world connections. Margaret's parents had eventually accepted their daughter's choice, though they never fully understood it. They received monthly letters and occasional photographs showing Margaret's life below ground. She appeared healthy and genuinely happy in ways they hadn't seen since her childhood. The underground community had given her something her surface life never could: a sense of belonging and purpose that justified the sacrifice of conventional family relationships. The Blackwood estate itself had been purchased by the underground community through a complex legal arrangement that recognized their historical claims while satisfying surface property law requirements. The mansion was being restored, not as a residence, but as a museum and education center where surface dwellers could learn about the community's history and philosophy without compromising their security. Chief Hayes, nearing retirement, reflected on how the case had changed his understanding of police work and community service. "We're used to thinking about law enforcement as maintaining order and finding criminals," he said. "But sometimes our job is recognizing when people are making choices that aren't criminal, just different." Margaret taught us that disappearing isn't always about running away from something. Sometimes it's about running towards something better. The tower room window in the mansion's second floor remained permanently open, maintained as a symbol of the transition between worlds. Community members had installed a discreet plaque beneath it reading, "In memory of Elena Blackwood, and all who chose to seek truth beneath the surface." The window served as a reminder that freedom sometimes required letting go of everything familiar and trusted. Detective Morrison often visited the mansion during her liaison duties, standing in that second-floor bedroom and thinking about Margaret's final night above ground. The room felt peaceful now rather than mysterious, a place of transformation rather than tragedy. Margaret hadn't been a victim of the house's dark history. She had become part of its evolution into something more hopeful. The case files remained open technically, though there was no longer a missing person to find. Margaret Chen had been located, was safe and happy, and had made an informed adult decision about her life. The bureaucratic category of missing person simply didn't apply to someone who had intentionally relocated to a different society while maintaining contact with authorities. As autumn returned to Millbrook, Detective Morrison reflected on how much the town had changed since Margaret's disappearance. The surface community had become more tolerant of difference, more aware of the complexity of human needs and desires. Some residents had even applied to visit the underground community, curious about alternative ways of living. Margaret Chen's story had begun as a mystery about a woman who purchased a dollar house and vanished without a trace. It had become something much more significant, a testament to the human capacity for reinvention and the importance of communities that accept people as they truly are. The house that had once been a symbol of tragedy and loss had been transformed into a gateway toward hope and authentic living. Subscribe to our channel to explore more archived and disturbing cases. Thank you for following Margaret Chen's story. See you in the next video. 5 years have passed since Margaret Chen walked through that open window and into a life most people could never imagine. The Blackwood estate stands as a monument to transformation, its Victorian facade carefully restored, its underground chambers thriving with a community that has redefined what it means to disappear. Margaret, now 39, has become the underground community's unofficial historian and educator. She spends her days teaching children who have never seen sunlight naturally, helping them understand both the world above and the sanctuary below. Her art has evolved too. Instead of teaching finger painting to 7-year-olds, she creates elaborate murals on cave walls that tell the stories of everyone who chose this hidden life. The dollar she used to purchase the mansion has been framed and hangs in the community's main chamber, a reminder that sometimes the smallest transactions lead to the biggest transformations. Margaret often jokes that it was the best investment she ever made, trading $1 and her surface life for a community worth more than any treasure. Her parents, Linda and David Chen, have aged visibly in these 5 years. The grief of losing a daughter to a choice they couldn't understand has been replaced by a reluctant acceptance and even pride. Margaret's monthly letters describe a daughter they barely recognize, confident, purposeful, deeply connected to her community in ways she never was in the surface world. They've learned to mourn not Margaret's death, but the death of their expectations for her life. The underground community has evolved from a hidden refuge into a recognized alternative society. They pay taxes now through a complex arrangement with federal authorities, contribute to surface world charities, and have even established a scholarship fund for people seeking to transition to alternative living situations. Margaret serves on the community council that makes these decisions, her teachers' training invaluable for navigating bureaucratic complexities. Detective Morrison, now Captain Morrison, has built her career on the precedent set by Margaret's case. She's become a national expert on missing persons cases involving intentional disappearance, helping other law enforcement agencies distinguish between genuine abductions and voluntary relocations to alternative communities. She estimates that 30% of missing person cases involve people who have chosen to disappear rather than been forced to vanish. The Millbrook Police Department now maintains a specialized unit for voluntary disappearance cases. They work with underground communities, off-grid settlements, and other alternative societies to ensure that people who choose unconventional lives aren't criminalized for their choices. Margaret's case fundamentally changed how authorities think about individual autonomy and the right to reinvent one's existence. Sarah Martinez has become a bridge between worlds in ways she never imagined. Her dual life, teaching above ground in the mornings, managing community affairs below ground in the afternoons, has made her an expert in navigating between different social systems. She's written a book about her experiences that has become required reading in sociology and social work programs nationwide. The Blackwood Estate Museum, operated jointly by the surface town and underground community, receives thousands of visitors annually. People come to understand how alternative societies function, to learn about the historical underground railroad connections, and sometimes to explore whether they might want to join the community themselves. Margaret often gives tours, though always wearing a mask to protect her privacy and the community's security. The mansion's tower room has been converted into a meditation space where people can contemplate major life transitions. The permanently open window serves as a symbol of possibility, a reminder that there are always choices beyond the ones immediately visible. Many visitors report feeling a sense of peace in that room, as if Margaret's courage in making an impossible choice has left something inspirational in the atmosphere. Rebecca Hendricks, the teenager who disappeared in 1982, emerged from the underground community 3 years ago at age 57. She had spent 41 years below ground, raising children and grandchildren who had never seen the surface world. Her decision to reveal herself was motivated by a desire to help other families understand that their missing relatives might be living full, satisfying lives in places they never thought to look. The underground community now includes over 200 people, ranging from infants born in the caves to elderly members who joined decades ago. They've developed their own traditions, their own governance systems, and their own definition of what constitutes a meaningful life. Margaret's artistic contributions have helped create spaces that feel like home rather than hiding places, underground chambers decorated with beauty that rivals any surface dwelling. Elena Blackwood's story has been rewritten as the community's founding legend. No longer remembered as a victim of her husband's cruelty, she's celebrated as the visionary who created the first intentional alternative community in the caves. Her bones were reinterred in a place of honor in the community's central chamber, with a plaque recognizing her as the first to choose truth over convenience, depth over surface. Theodore Blackwood's reputation has been completely rehabilitated through historical research Margaret conducted during her first years underground. Rather than the villain local history portrayed, he was revealed as a conflicted man who tried to protect his wife's choice to live differently while maintaining his surface world responsibilities. His journal entries, properly interpreted, show someone struggling to balance love with social expectations, a conflict many community members understand intimately. The legal precedents established by Margaret's case have influenced legislation in 12 states. The right to disappear bills protect adults who choose to leave conventional society, ensuring they can't be forced to return against their will as long as they periodically confirm their safety and voluntary status. Margaret inadvertently became a civil rights pioneer by simply choosing to live authentically. Children born in the underground community face unique challenges and opportunities. They grow up bilingual in surface and underground cultures, understanding both worlds without being fully committed to either until they reach adulthood. Some choose to attend surface schools, others prefer underground education. Margaret has helped develop curricula that prepare them for whatever life they eventually choose. The dollar house that started Margaret's journey has become a symbol of possibility that resonates far beyond Millbrook. Real estate agents across the country report increased interest in transformation properties, homes with unusual histories that might offer buyers opportunities to completely reinvent their lives. Margaret's story has inspired thousands of people to consider what they might be willing to sacrifice for the chance to live more authentically. Margaret's teaching credentials have been maintained through a complex arrangement that allows her to provide educational services to the underground community while satisfying state requirements for continued certification. She's become an expert in alternative education methods, developing programs that work in unconventional environments and serve populations with unique needs. The annual Open Window Festival has become Millbrook's most significant cultural event. Held every September to commemorate Margaret's transition, it celebrates people who have made courageous life changes. Surface and underground community members participate together in the only public event where both societies interact openly. Margaret always attends, though she remains masked to protect her privacy. Margaret's story has been optioned for a Hollywood film, though she has refused all interview requests and maintains creative control over how her experience is portrayed. She wants any adaptation to focus on the community she found, rather than the life she left, emphasizing the positive aspects of choosing alternative living rather than sensationalizing her disappearance. The limestone caves beneath Millbrook have been expanded and improved with sustainable technology that minimizes environmental impact while maximizing livability. The community has become a model for eco-friendly underground development, attracting attention from urban planners and environmental scientists interested in alternative housing solutions for growing populations. Margaret's monthly letters to her parents have been compiled into a book that provides insight into the day-to-day reality of underground living. Her descriptions of community meals, artistic projects, educational programs, and seasonal celebrations paint a picture of life that is different from surface existence, but equally rich and meaningful. The book has become a bestseller in alternative living circles. Detective Morrison often reflects that Margaret's case taught her the difference between finding someone and understanding someone. Margaret was never truly lost. She was found by a community that valued her in ways the surface world never had. The investigation's real success wasn't locating a missing person, but recognizing when someone has found exactly where they belong. Today, the Blackwood estate stands as proof that some houses are meant to be gateways rather than destinations. Margaret Chen paid $1 for a mansion, but what she really purchased was the courage to become who she was, always meant to be. In a world where most people spend lifetimes searching for authentic community and meaningful purpose, Margaret found both by following an open window into the darkness and discovering it led to light. The Dollar House is no longer for sale. It has served its purpose, transforming not just one woman's life, but an entire community's understanding of what it means to truly disappear and be found. Margaret's legacy lives on in every person brave enough to choose depth over surface, truth over convenience, and authentic community over comfortable isolation. Sometimes the most profound journeys begin with the smallest steps. Margaret Chen stepped through a window 5 years ago and found a world that had been waiting for her all along. Her story reminds us that home isn't always where we start. Sometimes it's where we choose to become who we were always meant to be.